Do you think
Alright,
it's
too wide, or is that okay? I think it's fine. Yeah. Okay. So, hey, what's up, guys? Today I'm here with my friend Henry, and he's now graduate from architecture school, and I'm now a graduate from interior design school. So today in this video, I want to talk about compare the different aspects of both interior design and architecture, and kind of like some of the similarities. So. Today we're going to get started with why both disciplines are necessary and what their roles are in the industry. So for people who don't know what interior design is a discipline where you're going to be in constant collaboration with engineers and architects. So the main job of an interior designer is to create a program for a building or space and kind of go through all the different variations of what that space could be and try to optimize your program for the function. And while doing this, you're going to be looking at the aesthetic of your space and how it affects the well-being of audience or like a guest that is walking through the space.
okay? Yeah. So I think from Kyle, what you talked about, it seems like interior design had a lot to do with like the inside of the building and kind of like curating the spatial experience as you move through a building or like a space. I would say architecture is a lot about like organization. Mm-hmm. So like, for example, like organizing like how like programs relate to each other in like the building, or like how different like site components and like the outside context around the building, how that works with the building, but at the same time also thinking about like the structural organization, that how that kind of works with mechanical and like HVAC and electrical and all that kind of stuff. That part of architecture I would say is like the building design aspect of it. But at the same time I would say that architecture itself is also about people. And I think that's something that I kind of like learned in my last year, that there's like this distinction between architecture and building design. Architecture, I think, also has to deal with the representation of culture and of society. And I think a lot of those ideas kind of like manifest itself in perhaps like a building.
So next we're going to talk about what our workflows are like, how they differ and how they're similar.
Yeah. So for architecture, I think it is in a way kind of like a jack of all trades, in that I think you kind of need to know a little bit about everything. Let's say I'm working on a design for a building. I think my workflow will probably start with some sort of like site visit or some sort of like research into maybe like the history of the site, or if it's like a different city or different context I'm not used to, maybe looking at more of like what the culture is like there. If I can, I would also go to the actual site and see like what kind of things I can pull apart from there that might influence design. So a lot of it kind of comes from like research first. And then usually something like program will come second. So it kind of starts with research, and then I would say it starts to go more into a concept that can kind of like string all this stuff together. And then from there, it kind of starts like the whole like design process. So that would be this process of like a series of like prototypes and like different iterations, going through different sketches, sketch models, maybe even like some writing I think helps to kind of collect some thoughts. And then from there, I think you would probably have like a presentation or something. And then from there, I think it would go into the more like the construction process.
So it sounds like you guys are going into like quite some depth with your proposals. I guess one of my questions would be, what does the timeline look for like to do all of this through your project?
One, depending on like how big the project is, like if you're doing like a small like residential project, or if you're doing like a small pavilion versus if you're doing like a big community center or like a sports complex or something, I think that also dictates how much time you have. But I would say maybe somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks.
I guess that would be like pretty similar for interior design, but I know in school they teach us like, oh, you have to draw from like your context and everything around you, and you have to take this and that into account. But I think when it really comes down to it and you have to just get the work done to string everything together, you try to relate everything as best you can back to your original concept. But the type of work that we're doing, I think, differs in the sense that we have to focus on more like specific stuff, detailing for either millwork or hardware in the space, and know exactly what type of hardware you're going to use, how that's going to come together, and how the construction of it will actually look, and if it's even possible.
I mean, I think a lot of that kind of depends on like the scale of the project as well, right? Like if you're working on like a house renovation, I think like probably an interior designer could do all of that. But I feel like maybe when you bring a project to like a bigger scale, whereas you're working on, let's say a museum, then I think it's a lot more important to have interior designer curate the interior spaces, have the architect maybe deal with more of like the organization of the space, and then like what room leads to another, a bigger picture like that, and then you have your engineers doing their thing.
Especially when you're working on such a large team, it's kind of hard to draw the line where your
sure.
roles are and where someone else's roles are. But for sure, I think it's important to outline that at like the very start of a project. So Our next question is, why do you think design build is important or not?
So I think in my university career, I have done a few design build projects here and there. Starting in first year, having more of like a volunteer role and working with like fabrication, and then in my senior years, working on the actual conceptual design and following the whole project through. I would be a huge advocate of doing design build during your studies to actually design something on paper, and then to have the ability and skill to bring it to life requires a whole different set of skills, and I think that's like a very different project. Let's say like a conceptual project on paper that will never be built versus something that's actually real and tangible. One aspect I think that's really important about it is this idea of like experiential learning, so that you're actually getting out there on the field, using your hands, and actually like doing what you're proposing. I think there's a lot of things that you learn from that you might not learn per se in school. I think there's just a lot of like nuances relating to like whether it's like the craftsmanship of how something comes together, or like coming down to like budget and realizing like, oh, like if I go with this joint connection, like that might cost more or it might take a lot more time, which is definitely something that's really important to consider as well.
I've got to agree with that because I feel like the hands-on experience gives you a whole different perspective of how long something actually takes to come together. The technical aspects, say you're doing an installation and you have to transport it, but you have to figure out how you're going to transport it, if it's a really big piece or if you have to break it down, and how those connections might actually come together. For me, I did my first design build project in my first year as well.
Yeah.
It was it's like a magazine booth for Frame. It was like laborious. There's a lot of labor.
Yeah.
In that first experience, I got to learn a lot about kind of the logistics behind what it takes to make a project successful. The types of things that you might not absolutely learn in school, or they might not tell you like, oh, you should also take this into account, because it's just when you're going to school, there's a whole lot of stuff that you have to learn already. So this type of hands-on stuff, I think it's better reserved for actual project experiences.
And I think that design builds are kind of like this part that adds to your education. But I think you certainly need a little bit of both to be a good designer. And obviously, like I think working on design build projects, when you're working with a partner, a small group, or a big team, I think that element of collaboration is like really important, and just knowing how to like work effectively in a team. I think that's something that design builds also teach you as well.
Yeah, I think to just close off, I think design build is really important in both industries, because say for an interior designer, even if you're not formally building it or assembling it, you have to know kind of the possibilities of what your tools and materials are and how you can make your design proposal come to real life if you're having an engineer build it. I know for the people that might not have as much knowledge on this, it's more difficult to draw a line where something can be like feasible and where it's just like physically impossible. Last question, most exciting question. What's with the tension between architects and interior designers?
A lot of like design disciplines in design schools, I think it's difficult to teach with like a big class. Like when you look at like business classes or like engineering classes where there's like hundreds of students in a lecture room, I think that design schools like really kind of need to have like a smaller group, so maybe around like let's say like 90 to like 120 students. So those are your classmates, and that's how big your year is. And like I think that when you work in studio together, have group projects together, you really get to know each other, and because of that you build a sense of like camaraderie, which is great because it like helps you get through the tough times. You can celebrate after, and there's just this whole friendships that build.
And you guys
as well.
learn from each other too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I learned so much
working in the studio. You guys have like so many learning experiences together. You're looking over your friend's shoulder and you're like, hey, did you know that you could do this function and it'll like speed up your workflow like 3 or 4 times?
So I think that because there is a sense of a camaraderie, I also think that a byproduct that is perhaps having a lot of pride in what you do. Because I mean, like you spend so much time working on design build projects, you have like sleepless nights, and there's just so much other stuff going on. Plus you have your own personal life and university life and all that stuff together. I don't know if it's like just architects or maybe like designers as a whole. I think there's definitely a bit of like an ego that comes with it.
I feel like, so the time that I've been in interior design school, and there is sometimes kind of like a crossover between architecture students and interior design students, whether it be interior design students going to the architecture workshop to complete a project or vice versa. They don't really talk that much, I don't think. And when you have someone else invading your space, I guess it might be considered kind of like obtrusive.
Yeah, like someone's coming into a territory and trying to
it's like
take over.
shun them. Yeah, I don't know. Like especially some of my interior design friends, they've felt victimized by some of the architecture profs. I'm not gonna be specific about that, but almost to the point that it felt like targeting for being in interior design school, which I don't really understand, because I feel like interior designers and architects can create like really great things if they work together. I just wish that there was more of that across campus. I think it's also important to be open to other opportunities and other ways of thinking as well. Otherwise, you miss opportunities to produce ideas or something creative that you can find in between like the cracks of these disciplines. To just close this video off, I think in the future it would be really nice to see more cross collaboration between interior designers, engineers, and architects.
Yeah, I definitely think that there needs to be this kind of like cultural shift between our disciplines and also like engineering as well. Like I think you can certainly learn a lot from other people and from other disciplines, whether it's like something that you didn't know how to do before, or like maybe someone else knows how to do it faster and more efficiently. I think the aspect of learning new things from other people is important, but at the same time it's also about learning about how to learn new things, and that requires like good communication skills, good teamwork skills, and like how to collaborate. So I think that part of it is also really important as well.
Yeah, alright, so that's the end of this video. If you guys liked it, give me a like down below. If you guys have any thoughts about this topic, I would love to hear your guys' comments as well. I'm gonna leave Henry's kind of social media, like I guess like right here or something. Yeah,
Somewhere here.
You can find his Instagram. He takes amazing photos, and you should go check him out. Yeah, so I'll see you guys in the next week.
Man, I went through like 4 years of architecture school and I feel like I still can't give a good answer about what architecture is.